Minnesota basketball fans, welcome back to the Living in Loserville podcast, Gopher basketball nostalgia edition. Yes, we're throwing it back just like last week. I'm your host, Chris Carlson. My co-host, Aaron Miller, will be joining us very shortly. We had some technical difficulties, which everyone can relate to, that's for sure. I guess you can kind of say the world has had a technical virus difficulty for the last couple of months. Not to make light of it, of course, but so we are back to talk a little 80s basketball, basically. We're gonna hone in on, the back-to-back tournament years and the Elite Eight run that fell just short. We're definitely gonna hone in on that. Talk a little bit about the years prior when Jim Dutcher, the Dutch, was head coach. And it's funny because when I look back at, kind of how you remember things, and then when you go look back and look them up and do a little more research to kind of, rekindle some thoughts, you're like, oh, wait, that's right. For some reason, I thought Clement came like by the mid-'80s. I thought 84, 85, somewhere in there, but I was mistaken. So we're definitely going to talk all about, like I said, this here Gopher run that, we saw DC Derek Coleman go down swinging. In fact, I actually watched a chunk of both these last games at Georgia Tech and with Syracuse, and I had forgotten that Derek Coleman got a tech and he threw the ball at somebody and stuff like that. So we're going to definitely, like I said, break all this stuff down. It'll be more of a quicker show than we know. We're not going to be on here for an hour and 20 minutes or anything like that. But it's always fun to hear these old names and just kind of reminisce, rewind like we've been doing first with the Vikings, and then now with the Gophers back-to-back weeks. If this is your first time listening to the Living in Loserville podcast, it streams live right here on blogtalkradio.com/Rope-A-Dope Radio. It streams live at archives right here, but you don't have to go to Blog Talk and download it or listen to the browser if you don't want to. Basically, you can find this show here under the Rope-A-Dope Radio podcast at Apple Podcast, iHeartRadio, Player FM, TuneIn, Spreaker, Stitcher, really across the board. We're also part of the Grueling Truth Sports Podcast Network, which can be found all across the board, including Spotify. You can use your Siri Alexa to tune into the platform through Spotify or tune into the platform for TuneIn. Kind of funny how that works. While you're at it, why don't you head on over to thegruelingtruth.com. That's thegruelingtruth.com. It's basketball, it's football, it's baseball, it's boxing, it's everything in between. They got a great sponsor over there, betnow.eu, with the promo code TGT. And one more thing before we get into this rewind of the Gophers. If you're thinking about cutting the cord, or you're not quite happy, I got something for you. I use it myself. It's called AT&T TV Now. It's live streaming cable. The plans start as low as $55 a month. However, there is a 7-day free trial. Once you sign up, there's no annual contract to hold you down. You can stream it anywhere. They do have the cloud DVR. It's called AT&T TV Now. Like I said, live streaming cable. However, if your internet is just horrendous, it's one thing to go on Netflix and check out an archive show or something like that. And in fact, I heard there's a new Chappelle little thing on there that I'm going to go on to later, actually, now that I think about it. But anyway, it's one thing, to do that, but to stream a live cable platform, it is a little different. So they do have an alternative growing platform, AT&T TV. That would be your normal cable platform. It's not available every single city. It is available here in Minneapolis, Minnesota, parts of New York, parts of Florida, parts of Texas, parts of California, all the way up to the Northwest with Seattle. Other places like St. Louis in the Midwest. Basically, just Google it, AT&T TV, put your area code in there, see if you got it in your area. Otherwise, AT&T TV Now, like I said, live streaming cable. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and bring in Aaron and see how he's doing. how the hell are you? I mean, I know technology can get in the way of both of us and the rest of the world, but everything going well on that side, technology-wise?
Yeah, everything's going well now. Let's hope, cross our fingers for the rest of the show. But yeah, it's got some weird updates and stuff. Now I'm gonna have to be completely honest with you, Chris. I think you remember I didn't get to Minnesota until probably 1991. I had a short stint in probably what had to have been 87 or 88, where I went to Scott Highlands, where we might have ran into each other. We're not quite sure. We think we did, and then I went back to Montana, then came back in 91. So a little of this 80s Gopher stuff's a little foggy for me. I do remember some names. No pun intended on the foggy part there. And so, yeah, I mean, a lot will be living vicariously through you on this episode, as well as whatever I can throw in and names that I can remember and things like that. I'm looking at some of the rosters. Some of the names stick out. Some of them don't.
All right. Well, that's okay. So yeah, we just kind of how we've been doing this with the Vikes first, and then the Gophers. Of course, we did the season that never happened in '97. So just looking at the roster, 81, 82-ish, that was a great year. Jim Dutcher, the head coach, 14-4 in the Big Ten, 23-6 overall. They won the Big Ten. I think that was the first outright title in like 10 years, something like that, somewhere in that range. And so at the beginning of the 80s, things were looking good. You had a guy named Randy Brewer, of course, Trent Tucker, Daryl Mitchell. I remember Gary Holmes as well. Howell as well. He was pretty solid too. And there was a guy on the roster coming off the bench, good old Jim Peterson as well. They ended up getting beat in the second round by Louisville that year. And it kind of spiraled slowly but surely. Go figure. It's a Minnesota sports podcast living in Loserville, right? Kind of started, spiraling out of control a little bit. This John Shasky, and I totally remember this guy. He just came in as a center. Power forward and center, we used to really do well in that position. You can go back to Flip and McHale and all that too. But Randy Brewer was a senior that year, and Jim Peterson played more. John Shasky, though, like I said, that really stands out to me as a name. Mark Wilson as well. So they were 18-11. 9-9, 6 in the Big Ten, so they dropped off. But then it really kind of fell off for the rest of the decade till we got to, I think, the second or third year with Clem, 15-13, finished 8 out of 10 when there was actually 10 in that, actually 10 in the Big Ten. And this is where I kind of had forgotten how long the Dutch, Jimmy Dutcher, had gone, like 13-15. It's 84, 85. This is actually when I thought that Clem had taken over. But I suppose now that I think about it, if they won a big championship in 82, which I vaguely remember, but I definitely remember, yeah, I suppose you're going to give the guy a whole lot of leash. And 3 years in a row at least, the next year, 85, 86, you're looking at 5-13, 8th in the Big Ten. And it just kind of fell off. Obviously, there is some stuff in the 70s that, they got in a little trouble for as well. They had some team issues as well. But I do remember Dutch as a head coach, but really also broadcasting and giving interviews on talk radio and local sports TV stuff. I remember, listening to his breakdowns before games and stuff like that, because he still was known, obviously, in the area, of course. But here we are, 86, 87, first year for Clem, and that kind of, like I said, when I thought back, I'm like, I could have sworn it was a couple of years before that, but obviously I was wrong. And you look at that first roster, it still had some decent names on it, some guys from the past. But then, you can look at it and you look at Richard Coffey and you look at Willie Burton was on the squad. Where is it? Jim Shikanansky. That dude, man, God dang, he could hit the corner three. He had that red hair, kind of had the hockey, not kind of, he had the hockey hair going on. So it just, I guess my point with Clem was I thought it took him like a good 3 to 4 years to build up. And although it did take him some time to build up, even the year before they made to the Sweet 16, you're looking at a club that was 9th out of 10 in the Big Ten, 4-14, 10-18 overall. But you can really see that roster, taking play or, molding together. You had Bob Martin as a freshman, Walter Bond now as a sophomore, Kevin Lynch as a sophomore, and, of course, Melvin Newborn and Willie Burton. Mario Green off the bench was another one. I remember Rob Metcalf as well. He's been in and around Minnesota for quite some time. But that first, it was his third year for Clem, 88, 89. And this is a couple of years before he came back. And 9-9, middle of the pack, 5th, 19-12 overall, though. And like I said, this squad was pretty damn deep. Even Kelvin Hammonds, God, I forgot that name. Ray Gaffney is a guy that when I look at this roster, go, oh my God, I haven't thought about that since basically these 2 years. Of course, people like Chick, just because he was a good all-around player. But they went about 7 deep that year, and that was the year the Ghosts made a run that not too many folks saw them coming. If you look at, they were an 11th seed going against a 6th seed in the first round of the tournament, going against Kansas State, ended up giving it to them pretty well, 86-75. And then Siena was a 14th seed because they had beaten number 3, but a 3rd seed Stanford at the time. So sometimes you're like, as a 6th seed, you'd rather not face the 3 seed, but as an 11, you're like, well, no matter what, the next game's going to be tough. But we did dodge a bullet a little bit going against Siena. And I remember I watched all 3 of these games because we were thinking about Vikings and even Gophers and where we were and things that come to mind. And that is all 3 of these games I watched in Apple Valley with my mom, every one of them. I definitely remember this year. But the Kansas State, it was like, wow. And this is when it was the Big 8, not even the Big 12. It was like, wow. All right, dude. Like, this is a big win. That's a 6th seed. We're 11th seed. And then the Siena ended up getting that. What was it, 80-67? They were on a 5-game winning streak. Because I remember right at the end of that year, they had kind of fallen off. And actually, let me back it up. Yeah, there it is. They lost 4 in a row, like down the stretch, but then they did manage all the way down the stretch to win 3 in a row, and that kind of got them into the tournament as well. But then, of course, they ran into Duke, and I remember even last week or maybe off the show, I remember us talking about this, and I did mix up Duke knocking us out in the Elite 8 rather than the Sweet 16. I had that backwards, but I did get Danny Ferry right. And, man, when you look at some of those other teams, Louisville and Illinois, that's with Kenny Battle and Kendall Gill and all those folks that year. But, yeah, 87-70, got beat up pretty good. Willie Burton came to play. He had 26 points. But other than Kevin Lynch, they couldn't hang with the firepower. And Quinn Snyder, Christian Leitner was a young player just as a role player at the time. Danny Ferry, as I mentioned. Phil Henderson, wow, I haven't heard that one. Even Davis wasn't really getting much that playing time. But you can kind of tell with that roster and the fact that they made a Sweet 16 that good things were coming, and Clem was for real. And, it felt pretty good going into that next year. And another stat that I didn't realize, this is the first time the Gophers had made back-to-back tournament runs. And I thought, is that true? Like that they hadn't been the tournament back-to-back years. So that kind of threw me off as I was kind of recalling this. But let's get to this stage right here. And obviously You knew Georgia Tech for sure. I think you know this squad a little bit better because I know you liked Kenny Anderson in Georgia Tech, and obviously that's who ended up knocking him out. But even some of these names that stand out, and I mean, you're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different guys who played in the NBA, at least made a roster on this squad going in to the best year on record still, because of course we know 97 didn't happen.
Yeah, so these are the names that I start to remember. I started to get into basketball pretty heavily around this time, and I do remember the Georgia Tech run, and I remember the first kind of exposure to Gopher basketball was this team with Willie Burton, Melvin Newbern, Kevin Lynch, Walter Bond. Nate Tubbs is a name that I remember a lot. Shikin Yansky is just a name that you can't really forget. And so, yeah, Richard Coffey as well. So, yeah, I started to see this. I didn't see much of it. I was getting a lot of national coverage, and they weren't on a lot of national coverage, but I did remember seeing the tournament games and being fairly impressed by them. And also, I was into, like, when you bring up Leitner, you bring up Kendall Gill, Dennis Scott, those type of guys, Kenny Anderson. This is when I really started to really dive into college basketball and started to take a look at it. So my memories of this team are kind of just getting on board with Gopher basketball and seeing where it went.
And Junior Graves is another name that he didn't play a whole lot, but that's another name that just stands out. It just kind of puts a smile on my face, like, oh yeah, that dude. And I gotta admit, like, when I look at this roster, I'm like, I forgot that Walter Bond had actually made a roster. I mean, that's pretty freaking impressive to have that many guys make the league. Now, Bob Martin didn't do much. None of these guys. Willie Burton actually went off as a Philadelphia 76er. He scored like 56 points or whatever actually in the old Spectrum too, now that I think about it. But it's not like he had just this phenomenal career, but you had Burton averaging 19 and 6, Newborn 15 basically, and 5 assists. He was kind of the all-purpose Lynch, good defender, and also could hit that 3, averaging 13 points. Walter Bond, we were a guard-heavy squad, but we did bring some beef to us, or at least some height. We had Coffey, who at 6'6" in college was a big dude. He averaged 9 boards. And then Bob Martin coming off the bench, who, he didn't play a lot of minutes, but it's a 7-footer. And a 7-footer in college is always nice. And Burton was a 6'8", kind of slash forward anyway. But we had Newbern and Burton, and then Lynch kind of came in there as key scorers. But those were our 2 thoroughbreds, I guess you could say. And when I look at it, really junior and senior heavy when it comes to this. So we're going through. I mean, obviously they had a much better year, 23-9, 11-7 on the season, and 4th place as well. Even though last year or the year before it was 5th at 9-9, but that's sometimes how that goes, And this was when the Big Ten was legit. Like I said, I believe Illinois – didn't Michigan and Illinois have to play each other? And that's – because Michigan won the championship right in this time. But that Illinois squad, like I said, Kendall Gill in battle, I mean, that was I want to say either 2 or 3. I think it was just 2 Big Ten teams made the Final Four that year, but I definitely recall.
Yeah, I remember Kendall Gill and Battle. Those 2 really stick out to me as far as the Big Ten goes. And a lot of this stuff I've gotten to know a lot of these players like after they played. Like Kevin Lynch has been on the radio. Walter Bond's done some spots. Coffey obviously is a legacy. Started a legacy here with his son coming to play. And Willie Burton. Now I thought I remembered Willie Burton playing for the Miami Heat and putting up all those points, but you might be right about the Sixers. I don't know if that was it, but I do remember him putting up the 50-point game in the NBA, and he kind of had a promising rookie season. I think he got injured or something went down. I'm not sure what it was, but yeah, this is like I remember I was getting cards at the time, and these names would pop up. Willie Burton specifically, I thought that he would be a good player, and I think he started off really well, just wasn't able to finish very good. But that year, it seems like 23 wins is a pretty good Big Ten season, considering Michigan was tough then too. This was the the rise before the rise of the Fab Five, and there were a lot of good names on that squad as well. So I'm not sure exactly if they won that season. I can't tell. I suppose I could get the Google machine out, but
It was
nonetheless,
the
yeah,
year before is that they won with Glenn Rice, with
that's
Lloyd Vaughn, Terry Mills, and Ramil Robinson was another
Yep.
guy who hit those clutch free throws, and they had Kalo as well, who actually ended up playing in the Sean Higgins too. Wow, I forgot he was a role player on that squad.
Yeah, so
Damn.
obviously it was a pretty good Big Ten, at least the top of it was. So a pretty impressive record for the Gophers at 23-9, 11-7 in the Big Ten.
Yeah, it was great. It was actually definitely a deep, because we've had some deep Big Tens in the last chunk of years, but they haven't been, cutting down those nets at the end of the year. They can even get, I think they've had 3 runner-ups in the last 10 to 12 years, something like that, but they just haven't been able to get over the hump. But going down the, just in general, going through that season, the like I said, it was just a consistent good season. I thought, man, we got someone here, dude. This Clem dude, everybody loved Clem. The players played hard. They played hard for their coach. They played great defense. They spread the ball. Like I said, you had Newborn and you had Burton, but it was such a deeper team than just that. They did really well. Kind of started out rough, not rough. They just barely lost to Cincinnati, but then went on a nice little win streak. I think it was like 11-game winning streak. Kind of up and down, but made some strides with some 3- and 4-game winning streaks through the Big Ten. A lot of the big losses were on the road. Some of them. Michigan actually beat us at home. Now that I'm looking at that, but overall, you felt good because you came in as a 6th seed this year. You weren't the 11th seed. This year, you're like, all right, dude, we made it to the Sweet 16. We got beat by a quality team in Duke who hadn't quite, released their wrath on college basketball yet and still needed to get their ass whipped by UNLV by 30 or 40 to get there. But they finally got there, no doubt about it, once Grant Hill came in and a lot of those guys aged and got, good veteran play there. But to begin it out, there's 6 against 11. Texas El Paso actually was I remember watching this while I was working, like partially, like, oh my God, what's this? What's that? Like looking at it in and out. I remember I got off. I think I was working for what turned out to be my brother-in-law in a sense. Oh no, he was back then. What am I saying? Actually, no, he wasn't. What am I saying? I kind of forgot these years. But they almost lost the first freaking game. 64-61 to OT to Texas El Paso, and I'm like, okay, that wasn't great, but we did end up getting Northern Iowa, who as I think a 11th seed, or maybe they were higher, they ended up beating who the hell did they beat? But so we basically got another break, much like Siena the year before. So it was like, all right, well, took care of business, still was a close game. And then came Syracuse. And Syracuse was a team that was the Big East in general was so dominant. You had Georgetown. Even back then, you had Nova. You had Syracuse. And you're looking at this squad, and you're thinking, okay, and even Loyola Marymount back then, man, that UNLV Loyola Marymount game, I remember that. It's like 131 to 100 or something like that. Loyola Marymount would just throw up the threes right. They were like Golden State before Golden State. But in that game, you're going against Billy Owens. You're going against Derek Coleman. Those two names, especially Coleman. Coleman was, a lot of people thought he'd be the number 1 pick that next year. And it's just kind of surreal going against DC. And, I was so excited for the game. Sweet 16. And it just felt like we had so much experience coming back that this was going to be a year we could actually maybe beat them. And I actually have some interesting audio from this. I'm just going to go ahead and play, and we'll get back to some of this here. They'll play it right now. 48. And this was kind of during the game. It was a back-and-forth game,
Both teams making little mini runs to get up, but it was pretty close the whole way. This was like second half.
Of the Syracuse Orangemen, who had 15 points. But a scrappy Minnesota ball club is hung in there. And Greg, that pretty much exemplifies what's happened. It's just that Minnesota just scrapped out here. They've had various people come up big for them. Bob Martin come off the bench, played well. Newberg's got a good second half. And Coffey played a great first half. So they've got a lot of people pitching in for Minnesota. That's where they got this win.
Here's another clip here. And you could tell Derek Coleman had a rough game, really bad game. And he started getting really frustrated. And this is him getting a technical.
Coleman was bumped from behind. And from here, I would say he overreacted. There's no question. I don't care what anybody did to you. You don't have to throw the basketball at him. Derek Coleman has shown such good improvement. For him to do this is just absolutely unnecessary. You see right here that Martin is there. And it looks to me like Derek Coleman initiated everything. He not only threw the ball, but he threw an elbow as well. Here's another look. Like I say, he's got position, and he just comes over it, and he fell backwards. I don't think Bob Martin meant to do anything.
And you can actually hear the Gophers fan base in the back, too, just starting to freaking get all up on DC. One more clip really quick as we kind of wind down with some of this stuff.
Minnesota. Well, they've really played well, and the guy we thought would play well, Willie Burton, really hasn't. But Newberg came in, he got 20 points. Lynch has 18, and Richard Coffey has 12 points, 11 rebounds. And most notably, Greg, they were poor. Minnesota never let Syracuse get that big run, and they were able to stay in the game, and that's what's got them in there. Clint Hampton is doing it absolutely as he wants the game, kept it together.
And that's what it was. They were just a spread effort. From that squad just in general, throughout. That's really what I remember from the squad. It just being a good all-around, all-purpose squad. And I got a couple other stats from the even like in the second half, the first, I think, 10 minutes, Minnesota was shooting well. 75% to 33%, 16-11 run at the time. And really, like they said, it was really just Billy Owens. I mean, he was the guy that was keeping them alive. And then they did make a run. I think they got up by like 5 or 6, maybe up to 8, the Gophers did. But then Syracuse down the stretch with 4 minutes left, or there was a 4-minute stretch. I think that put them right about 3 minutes left in the game where they went 16-7. And then I thought, oh, boy, here we go, living in Loserville. It's all coming into play. But that was not the case. And Lynch had a rough first half. 2 points, ended up scoring 16 in the second half, and hit 2 really clutch threes when they needed it. Melvin Newbern was all over the place, 20 points, 4 assists, 4 steals as well. Coffey had 12 points, but 12 boards. Willie just kind of off that night, and like he even said on the audio there that Willie was just off, and Bob Martin had a good game off the bench. I think he said that right at the end of that audio. But when you look at field goal percentage for the game, 59% to 43, and 43 is actually not horrible, but fucking 59%, dude, that's something, man. That is something, and it just started clutch bucket after clutch bucket. Kevin Lynch down the stretch hitting free throws, and it just felt like this thing's going to happen. And most people in the state were shocked that they were actually going to beat Derek Coleman, who's going to be, a top 3 pick or whatever in the Syracuse Orangemen with such a storied program at that time.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you remember at that point in time, this is sort of the rise of the Syracuse, rise to dominance, Boeheim's zone, and all that stuff. With these 2 players, Billy Owens and Derek Coleman. And Coleman was a dominant college player, and must have been lucky for us that night that he didn't play well. But then again, our top player didn't play well either. So it was kind of like a war of attrition, it seemed like, and we went a couple guys deeper than they did. Looks like I got 7 guys that were scored in that, and we got 9 on our side. So I think the goal there was probably just to know that they weren't that deep and wear them down. And, you know, I remember Billy Owens as being a nice, like, small forward type of player. And then Derek Coleman obviously was a power forward and dominant in college and in the pros. He had a few good years, but he didn't, you know, go on to do too much, at least as much as was expected of him. But yeah, this was the beginning of the Syracuse uprise. And so it was an interesting thing. I don't think anybody thought the Gophers had a real chance against those two players, but they managed to pull that out, like you said.
I'm having a little mic issue. You can hear me now, right?
Yeah, I gotcha.
Okay. I must have muted it or something. I didn't think.
Yeah, I was going to fill in the time, but yeah.
So anyway, you're right. I heard everything you said there. And this is just kind of near the end of that. Here's a little clip. Maybe it's actually my computer. Maybe I'm having the computer problems now. Ooh, wouldn't that be fun? Okay, here we go.
I said this to you. I thought Minnesota had a chance to beat Syracuse, but I tell you what, that guy in the center of the screen has really done it. Clint Haskins. Minnesota goes 23-8. Stephen Thompson's career at Syracuse comes to a very bitter end here on the floor of the Superdome in New Orleans.
Another big win in the Superdome in New Orleans. I had to fit that in too, and then obviously. Georgia Tech, you were definitely, like you said, more familiar with in general. And, you know, it was like, all right, dude, Elite Eight, here we are. Obviously, they ended up losing 93-91. And there's that score, UNLV #1 that year, who won the championship, 131-101 over Loyola Marymount, dude. Golly, that's crazy. But Dennis Scott, Kenny Anderson, and Brian Oliver. And that's the one I couldn't think of, because we knew they had three big guys. And I was like, what is that last one? And sure enough, it's Brandon Oliver.
Yeah, that was a slick team. You had the two wings. You had Kenny Anderson doing what he was doing. I think was he a freshman? He came in. He might have been a sophomore, some kind of redshirt deal. But, man, he came in slick, and you just thought, oh, wow, this guy's good. And I was really into point guards there because my size. I thought I was going to be playing point guard. And eventually I did, but and I was just like, this guy can do his great handles, could shoot, a little attitude with him, and just a really good player. And then, like you said, he got on the wings, got to get outside to get Dennis Scott. And then you're right, Brian Oliver is the name that we were trying to dig up last week, but we couldn't quite put our finger on. And that's it. For some reason, I thought it was Dennis Scott. Maybe that's because they played in the NBA together, but
Nick Anderson. I think that's what screwed us up.
Yeah, and this was a quality basketball team, and this is when I really saw the Gophers and was like, okay. Of course, I was going for Georgia Tech because I hadn't really gotten an alliance going with the Gophers at that point in time. But I remember watching this game thinking, well, they might pull it out. And, of course, living in Montana, where I lived in a small town there where basketball was everything. Every kid played basketball. It was just something that you did. Wasn't much else to do. I think this town had one church, one store, one school, dirt roads, no signs, no nothing. Just a little rural town in Montana. And so, yeah, we played basketball and chess. That was our thing at that point in time, and collected cards and all that stuff. Fun stuff you do when you're a kid.
Football too, though, right?
Yeah, football, we'd have to go to a different town to play football. So that was another thing. Get on the bus after school, go to practice. 7th grade practice. Oh man, now you're taking me back. And then you'd ride a bus for about 40 minutes on the way home, go home, take a shower, do all that stuff. And of course, 7th grade football is not, that sophisticated. So I think I was a wide receiver and I just ran routes and never caught a pass. It was one of those things. Nobody could throw the ball then, and so we just ran the football. We were a pretty good team though. But nonetheless, basketball was the star of that show, and so we started watching a lot through this tournament, and then, yeah, you're right, UNLV, Loyola Marymount, this is all the stuff that's, like, clicking back in my head. And, yeah, this game with Georgia Tech, it was closer than a lot of people thought it would be. I think the Gophers had a really good chance of winning this game. I think wasn't there a turnover close to the end that kind of sealed the deal for them in this one?
Well, we'll get to it in a second. I'm going to play a clip just to intro the game here.
Continuing coverage of the road to the Final Four. And today we make our final 2 stops. Coming up in about 35 minutes, we'll wander way down yonder to New Orleans, where Clem Haskins' Golden Gophers will try to defuse Lethal Weapon 3, the explosive Georgia Tech offense.
There it is, Lethal Weapon 3. Here's another one. That's what it was, Lethal Weapon 3, because the move.
Haskins learned the game of basketball well in his playing days. Now he's the teacher, and his students, like senior forward Willie Burton, have done their homework, and the results are evident. Burton has been the big scorer for the first Minnesota team ever to reach a regional final. His dream is the Final Four. Dream of mine, get to the Final Four, watching on TV and the celebration, watching the team continue on and drive to compete in our college basketball. And we get at a tournament, we said this is it, and this is actually it. This came from here on out to be our last. But we're trying. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to New Orleans. I'm Greg Gumbel. We'll have to try hard to top what happened here on Friday night and closed out the action.
Yeah, and this is a little clip of Kenny Anderson winning a game-winning 3, I think it was, in the Sweet 16.
In the 2 games in the semifinals, Kenny Anderson capped the regular overtime, but prior to the overtime, capped the regular action this way. There's question as to whether or not that shout should have counted. It did. It tied the game, and in overtime, Georgia Tech eliminated Michigan State. I'm joined, as usual, by my partner, Quinn Buckner. A lot of people expected Georgia Tech to reach this stage, but not Minnesota. But you did. You said they'd be here. Well, I thought Minnesota could control the tempo.
Buckner was the only person that thought we'd be there, and I always liked Buckner. Now I know why I liked him so much. I guess I had forgotten that he was one of the national guys that really was going for us. Maybe he just tight with Clem too as a combination. It was fun to watch us, but man, Anderson, Oliver, and Scott, Lethal Weapon 3, and they got up the freaking court, up, down. But yeah, that thing came down to this is actually with 7 seconds left. Georgia Tech had a 1-and-1 and they up 2, and they missed it at front end, and Gophers got the ball, and Kevin Lynch tried to launch up a 3 and ended up not getting it done. So I think there was a turnover in the last minute, though, that was pretty crucial. But we did actually have a chance to win it with the Kevin Lynch 3. It wasn't like just this gimme wide open 3 by any stretch. But, yeah, Dennis Scott went for 40. Wow, 7 of 12 from 3. And I remember just like, this fucking guy does not miss. What is going on? Why can't we put a body on him? And Kenny Anderson, had his 8 rebounds, 30 points as well. Oliver kind of all-purpose there, had 19 as well. But, I mean, Willie didn't show up in the game prior, right? No doubt about it. He had a rough one. But he came back with 35 points and 7 boards. Newbern had 6 assists, 17 points. Schick had 19 and 5. Lynch had 12. He was only 2 of 3, but he was 1 for 5 from 2 points. So he must have been. That's a little weird. He didn't have a great game. Didn't really get a whole lot off the bench, and I think that kind of caught up to our Golden Gophers in that game, going down 93-91 to end the Superdome. That's so funny that we had our biggest win back then in the Superdome in New Orleans. What were you going to say?
Well, that's a good point. I didn't even make that connection. But did Richard Coffey get in foul trouble here? Well, it says he played 32 minutes, had 4 points. I mean, that definitely could have led to the way that game went.
Well, if he had foul problems, he played, he would have played 32 of the 40. So
yeah.
But I think he did late though in that game. Actually, let me check. Same with Newbern. Yeah, he did have 4 fouls, so he could have got that. I'm pretty sure I don't know about Newbern. He had 4 fouls at the end, but he ended up with 4. If you look at it, Lynch had 4 as well. So, probably a couple more minutes there with all those guys may have made a difference right there.
Yeah, but Lethal Weapon 3, come on, man. You're getting, 90 points out of 3 players between Scott, Anderson, and Oliver. And now you brought up that Dennis Scott couldn't miss. That definitely brought back a memory. I remember watching that just going, wow, this guy's just not missing threes. And that was a lot of like the team that I played on back then. It was really good 3-point shooters, and it's about all we did was shoot threes, and yeah, so we were really jazzed up about that. But also, Kenny had 30. I don't know how many assists he had. Let me take a look. I mean, he only had 3, but I mean, he really was the kind of guy that just kind of controlled the floor. And I'm not sure Newbern, I think he was the point guard for the Gophers, could keep up with him or defend him very well. So that's definitely that went into that game. But to lose by 2 to a really great team, in that position in the Final Four, you got to think that there's better things to come.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they were losing a fair amount of folks there, but 49 to 47 in the first half, 93 to 91, at 90s, both teams 90s, is telling you something. But watching the game back a little bit, there's only the first half on the internet. The whole game got taken off for some odd reason. Maybe Kenny Anderson's like, nah, dog, that's my shit. But the Gophers were up 12 points with about 4 minutes left, and even had a 46 to 37 lead, or maybe they're up by 9 or 11 with 2-something to go. And then freaking Kenny Anderson and company shrunk that lead down to 2, 49 to 47. So I actually think that was you got up by 12. That wasn't a death sentence, but it was kind of like, dude, we're starting to really put it together, and then we didn't. But yeah, Kenny Anderson getting up and down the floor, nobody was really going to guard him. But yeah, man, it's that's still the furthest that team has ever been, if you think about it, as far as counting on the NCAA thing. And when you look at the first time back then that they made back-to-back tournaments, it makes you think, hey, Tubby wasn't that bad. We got to the second round. 2 out of 3 years, and really would have been 3 out of 4 years if it wasn't for the Gophers. And I'm speaking of the last chunk of years under Pitino. 4 out of their 5, players in the starting lineup was either hurt or suspended. That was a Sweet 16 caliber team. So it kind of makes you recollect your thoughts on, let's calm down on this Fire Pitino shit. He's a bum,
Yeah, and you really got to look at what Clem did. I mean, he started, 85, took the team over 85, 86, something like that, ended up going to Sweet 16, a Final Four, and made the tournament, 3 of those 4, maybe even all 4 of those years. Now, after that, it got a little bit – after this, it kind of took a dive, and that's when Clem started to see a little bit of heat coming before the rise came up at the end of the 90s. But, overall, looking back, compared to, like you said, Tubby Smith, maybe that could have gone better with a little bit more time. And Pitino's just doing what he can, and I'm really got no problems with him. I think you're right. I mean, just let him do what he needs to do. He's got a lot of people leaving early, and, that's to be expected when you start to rise a program. Basketball is not like football. You're not recruiting as many guys. You got to get – each guy has more impact, and things like this take time.
3 years, in football.
So I don't know. I'm not hearing a lot of that right now, but you stay the course, I think, with him. I mean, that's kind of what you got to do. But don't forget how good Clem was. Although it ended badly, he did a pretty good job as coach of the Gophers.
Oh, he did a great job, definitely. Any last words before we get out of here, sir?
No, nothing at all. Just make sure you follow us on Instagram at living.in.loserville.podcast. And look on Facebook groups. We'll be getting out there and posting things.
All right, you guys take it easy, and we are going to shut down the show for a little while. We'll be back sometime, well, you never know. There could be something that the Vikings do, or who knows? There could be something that is warranted to have a show where you're like, all right, this is big news. But otherwise, we are going to shut it down. We've actually gone longer. Usually it'd be just after whatever the Gophers did, and because we basically know by this, by the end of March, we know where the Timberwolves usually is. So there's really no secret there. Hopefully they can battle for a spot next year. That would be nice. I don't know if that's actually going to happen, but that would be nice to be in the battle the last month or something for that A spot. But we obviously extended it. We did all these throwback rewind shows, so we want to appreciate everybody that listened to us during this time. And we'll be back fresh for, maybe some Vikings news with Delvin Cook or whatever. But either way, we'll be back whether it's midsummer, sometime in the summer, or for the season. Let's hope, knock on wood, that we have a full season and everything goes good with COVID as well. Until next time, you guys have a great summer. Peace.